Everything you need to know about Jake Paul versus AJ in 5. So the mega fight takes place this Friday night in Miami, Florida. Jake, the problem child, aka El Gallo, was born in Cleveland, Ohio. He now resides in Puerto Rico, where he runs his mega MVP, most valuable promotions boxing company, among other things. He will be jumping up to fight previous two-time heavyweight unified champion AJ this Friday in Miami. AJ has a 89% KO knockout ratio. Jake Paul has a 58% knockout ratio. Jake Paul is 6'1". AJ is 6'6". Jake Paul normally seems to walk around between 190 and 200-ish pounds, basically cruiserweight. And Anthony Joshua hasn't had to make weight in one fight until now in this contract. He cannot come in heavier than 245 pounds. But guess what? I just showed you. AJ made his debut at 230 pounds. Most people argue that Anthony Joshua is at his best when he's around 240s. Ballooning up to high 250s, low 260s is never good for him because he's too muscle bound, he's too stiff, he's too big, builds up too much lactic acid in the fights, can't recover and get a second wind. So you could argue that Jake Paul has actually made Anthony Joshua more dangerous in this fight by putting the weight clause in the contract. Now, whilst Jake Paul was a Disney star and gathering an online social media mass following, Anthony Joshua was quietly going about his business as a professional boxer who was a gold super heavyweight medalist at the London 2012 Olympics. Now, it's worth noting that Jake Paul didn't make his debut until January 2020 against Gibb, at which point he weighed in at 191 3/4 pounds. Now, bear in mind, Anthony Joshua, who is 8 years older, made his debut at 230 3/4 pounds. So just shy of 40 pounds difference at their debuts. Not to mention, AJ made his debut in October 2013 versus Jake Paul's January 2020. Their last opponents, well, Jake Paul had a very underwhelming and suspected kind of controversial win over Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Not the legend, his father, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., had a lot of outside of the ring problems, was deemed to be in very poor condition physically coming into the bout. And unspectacularly, Paul went the distance and won by unanimous decision. In fact, Jake Paul's 3 biggest career wins have all ended in unanimous decision. Now, the boxing purists, dirty word for some, hate the fact that the legend Mike Tyson in his 60s got in the ring with Jake Paul. But they did. They wore massive gloves, 14 or 16 ounce gloves. And the old man looked old. Legend, albeit he was old. So he didn't knock out Mike Tyson. He didn't knock out Nate Diaz. And he didn't knock out Anderson Silva. The last two, who are UFC legends, who transferred over to boxing for the payday with Jake. All of these fighters I've just mentioned, his 3 biggest names, were all years, if not decades, out of their prime, let alone in their non-natural arena coming from the UFC to boxing. On the contrary, Anthony Joshua's 3 biggest wins, the man who beat the man, Wladimir Klitschko, who was the last lineal champion before Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury would dethrone Wladimir Klitschko a couple of years before, and then he had the famous kind of outside of the ring spiral into chaos with personal issues. AJ at Wembley Arena, 80,000, which I was lucky enough to be one of, put on a show that night, a coming-of-age performance. So he beats Wladimir Klitschko, albeit AJ gets dropped himself, but shows heart, rallies, as he often does, like against Andy Ruiz. So that brings me on next to the rematch with Andy Ruiz, the first time he fights in Saudi Arabia. He got very badly beaten at Madison Square Gardens by Andy Ruiz, getting dropped 3 or 4 times before being waved off on his feet by the ref. He would then come back and box a very fluid, back foot, perfect defensive, safety first performance. So he beats Wladimir Klitschko Andy Ruiz, and he unifies against Joseph Parker, who is still relevant till right now. This is a crazy fight. Jake Paul, entertainer first, boxer second. Now, while he has to be congratulated on his efforts into carving out somewhat of a professional boxing career, it has to be noted that he's going in with a colossus of a man, albeit coming off the back of a knockout loss to Daniel Dubois, himself a devastating puncher in the ilk of AJ. Jake Paul may have sparred some heavyweights, but he has never, ever been in the ring under the lights with a athletic, experienced, proven pedigree, potentially hungrier than ever heavyweight in the form of Anthony Joshua. I predict this one to end by devastating, exhilarating knockout for Anthony Joshua, a la Francis Ngannou, which is what he did in Knockout Chaos in Riyadh, with either the traditional AJ uppercut or that huge overright landing on El Gallo's beard. And it will be good night. Elvis has left the building. Ring wraps, boxing highs. That's Jake Paul, Anthony Joshua in 5.